Welcome to POTUS 2016, where we call the presidential horse race and pour cold hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Orlando, the city, is suddenly shorthand for America's deadliest mass shooting in modern times. 49 murdered, 53 injured in a nightclub that had been a joyful, safe gathering place for the LGBT community, especially for Latinos. Because of the target chosen, the shooter's pledge of allegiance to ISIS, and his use of an easily purchased assault rifle, the massacre drew a bright red line between the two leading presidential contenders. Donald Trump expanded on his call for a ban on Muslim immigration.
When I'm elected, I will suspend immigration from areas of the world where there is a proven history of terrorism against the United States, Europe, or our allies.
Trump later suggested that Orlando might have been less tragic if the nightclub patrons had carried guns. Hillary Clinton called Trump shameful and suggested the tragedy might have been averted if Congress had voted to keep guns out of the hands of people on the terror watch list.
If the FBI is watching you for suspected terrorist links, you shouldn't be able to just go buy a gun with no questions asked.
Which the shooter did, despite the FBI having investigated him. But now Mitch McConnell, the GOP Senate Majority Leader, says he's open to legislation perhaps to keep weapons out of the hands of terrorists, just not the version Democrats want. And President Obama, he spoke to the nation a few times after the shootings and was soon deep in campaign politics.
We now have proposals from the presumptive Republican nominee for President of the United States to bar all Muslims from immigrating to America. We hear language that singles out immigrants and suggests entire religious communities are complicit in violence. Where does this stop? The Orlando killer, one of the San Bernardino killers, the Fort Hood killer, they were all U.S. citizens. Are we going to start treating all Muslim Americans differently? Are we going to start subjecting them to special surveillance? Are we going to start discriminating against them because of their faith? We've heard these suggestions during the course of this campaign. Do Republican officials actually agree with this?
We'll try to answer that question and a few others in a few minutes when we talk with two conservative columnists about Trump. And later in our evidence-based politics segment, we'll examine some new research about hate crimes against LGBT people. First, though, how the very end of the primary season is really just the starting bell. Yes, time for the horse race. 1 week after clinching the Democratic nomination, Hillary Clinton locked up roughly 80% of Washington, D.C.'s primary vote. On Tuesday, Bernie Sanders vowed to fight for not the nomination, but Democratic primary reform. He met with Clinton to compare campaign positions and their views of the Democratic agenda. But more important for the party, Bernie voiced his full-throated opposition to Donald Trump. Trump's over-the-top rhetoric seems to be a gift to Democratic Party unification. So how are the presumed candidates, Hillary and Donald, faring against each other after such a sad and tumultuous week? Well, the Orlando tragedy happened Sunday, so polls taken after are just beginning to trickle in. In a CBS News poll released early Wednesday, a majority of Americans appeared to approve of Clinton's handling of the issue over Trump's, but that poll wasn't restricted to likely or registered voters. So let's get some input from the real-time betting markets. PredictWise factors in not just polling, but how people are laying down hard cash on the result of the November election. Right now, the site shows Hillary Clinton's chances of winning the presidency at 74%, shown by that top red line. You can see her uptick in recent days. Donald Trump, the line below, shows a 26% chance in the wake of Orlando. It appears that Clinton might have received a bump in the betting markets from the tragedy, while Trump's perceived chances of winning have dipped slightly. But this may also be a result of Clinton recently securing the nomination and Trump having to defend himself on several fronts. It also could be a reflection of Trump's most significant leadership test since winning his party's nomination. Trump usually polls worse than Clinton on who voters trust during an international crisis. However, according to Gallup polling last month, Trump is slightly ahead, 50 to 46%, when it comes to handling terror and security. And after Orlando, therefore, it will be important to see which candidate gains strength on the issue of gun control. A majority of Americans favor stricter gun laws, which favors Democrats, but according to Pew Research, the issue divides white working-class Democrats. The New York Times' Nate Cohn points out that almost half of white working-class Democrats think it's more important to protect gun rights than to control gun ownership. Seizing the moment, Trump proclaimed Monday that gun owners, now more than ever, need protection. This year's electorate is also predicted to be more diverse than ever, and Trump has yet to appeal to non-white demographics in large numbers. If that remains the case, he will need to rely on white voters even more than Mitt Romney did in 2012. Then why do betting markets have Clinton so far ahead, while polling between the two candidates seems so close? According to David Rothschild, economist and creator of PredictWise, factors other than national popularity are playing a big part. Clinton still leads in many key electoral college states, and the economy is also helping as income growth continues to rise and fellow Democrat Barack Obama's approval numbers remain strong. Hillary's campaign is strong too. She has a lot of money in the bank and has a more developed get-out-the-vote apparatus in place. And while her battle with Bernie is all but over, Trump is still in trouble with his own party. After Orlando, House Speaker Paul Ryan again had to distance himself from the presumptive nominee. Ryan opposes any religious test to enter the country and earlier had called Trump's attack on a federal judge textbook racism. On Sunday, ABC's George Stephanopoulos pressed Ryan on whether Trump has the temperament to be commander-in-chief.
I can't speak for his stage presence, but in private, I find his temperament to be much better than what you see on stage.
So you're confident he could be an effective commander-in-chief?
Look, I believe that he's certainly better than Hillary Clinton. These are the choices that we have.
Ryan's decision to support Trump seems firm. So does Mitt Romney's rejection of Trump.
I don't think there's anything I'm looking for from Mr. Trump to give him my support. He's demonstrated who he is, and I've decided that a person of that nature should not be the one who, if you will, becomes the example for coming generations or the example of America to the world. Look, I don't want to see trickle-down racism. I don't want to see a president of the United States saying things which change the character of the generations of Americans that are following. Presidents have an impact on the nature of our nation. And trickle-down racism, trickle-down bigotry, trickle-down misogyny, all these things are extraordinarily dangerous to the heart and character of America.
The GOP's 2012 candidate is not alone in his thinking. Let's talk about that. Joining us, Robert A. George, editorial writer for the Daily News. After the '94 midterm elections, he worked for then House Speaker Newt Gingrich. And with us as well, James Taranto, member of the Wall Street Journal's editorial board and writer of the journal's Best of the Web column. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks.
Robert, I see you wrote a letter to Paul Ryan asking him to rescind his support of Donald Trump. Do you know Paul Ryan?
Yes, we worked on the Hill together back in the 1990s, and I know him a little bit socially as well. And I knew him. The context of the open letter was the fact that in the 90s he worked for Jack Kemp, who was a conservative. But a conservative who thought it was important to reach out to minority communities and push policies like empowerment zones and so forth. And the question I posed to Speaker Ryan was, what would Jack Kemp be thinking about Donald Trump and about your support for him, particularly in the context of his own statement saying that what Trump was saying about the Mexican-American judge was a textbook case of racism.
Would you support a rescission on the part of Paul Ryan, or where do you start on Donald Trump?
Well, let's talk about this trickle-down racism idea, first of all. Where is it trickling down from? I'd like to read you a quote from a federal judge who said, quote, "Whether born from experience or inherent physiological or cultural differences, our gender and national origins may and will make a difference in our judging." That was Sonia Sotomayor, then a judge on the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in 2001. Of course, she's now on the Supreme Court. She also said, quote, "I would hope that a wise Latina woman with the richness of her experiences would more often than not reach a better conclusion than a white male who hasn't lived that life." So the idea that she's putting forward is exactly the idea that Donald Trump was putting forward in what I agree were his prejudicial and ugly statements about Judge Curiel. She put it in a rather prettier way, but I think it's a very pernicious idea that judges can't judge independent of their racial or ethnic origin.
How would you compare the Sotomayor statement and the Trump statement?
I can see the similarity. I can see the similarity there. I thought that that statement by then Judge Sotomayor was unwise, actually. So I disagree with Sotomayor, and obviously I disagree with Trump as well.
There's a difference, though, isn't there, between characterizing a sort of richness of experience coming from a multiplicity of backgrounds and just accusing of somebody of bias because he's got a Mexican heritage.
All right, well, let me give you another quote then. This is Harry Reid in 2014 talking about the Hobby Lobby case, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act case. Quote, "The one thing we are going to do is to ensure that women's lives are not determined by virtue of 5 white men." Now, first of all, one of the 5 men was Clarence Thomas, who was not white. But this was a case that had no racial implications whatsoever. All right, I can understand complaining that they were all male, but why does he bring race into it? The point is, this kind of racially charged talk about judges is par for the course on the politically correct left. Trump is just coming at it from a different angle, and I condemn him for it, but I think we should condemn these people. One more quote. President Obama on Merrick Garland, his Supreme Court nominee. "You know, yeah, he's a white guy, but he's a really outstanding jurist. Sorry, but yeah."
Exactly. It is the case that on the left there has been and this is something that angers Republicans quite a lot, is the throwing around the R word, the racism word, even if it's not tangentially connected. I was on a panel discussion, or a panel discussion which injects a little bit of humor into it as well, I would admit. But one of the panelists, who happens to be a white male, and it's kind of important in the context here, just said in passing, referring to John Kasich as, only slightly less racist than Donald Trump. And I was thinking, where are you getting that? And he said, well, Kasich's policies, hurt poor people and hurt black people. Therefore, from his perspective, he's racist. That is a sentiment that you get, that a lot of Republicans get, that if they, just because of the conservative policies, they are considered racist, or in some fashion.
But then what do you make of
so when you get
Paul
the real
Ryan
thing,
using the word, of Mitt Romney using the word? I mean, this is very different language than, say, they used about anything in the United States in their 2012 presidential campaign.
I personally would not use the word racist in the context of Donald Trump. I would use the word bigot, because I think that is a better definition of what he was putting forward with Judge Curiel.
Is that because Latino isn't a race, or for some other reason?
Well, Latino isn't a race. I mean, in fact, if you look on the census, it says Latinos can be people of any race. But I think bigotry tends to cover Donald Trump's views towards the Mexican-American judge, towards Muslims, maybe in some of his language towards women as well. I think it's more comprehensive.
I agree with that. I think Ryan made a mistake allowing himself to be baited into using the word racism. But I actually think that Donald Trump may in the end be very good for race relations. Here's why I say this. I was puzzled and appalled by Donald Trump a year ago when he first announced his presidential campaign. I could not understand his appeal. I started asking people who are Trump supporters, and what I kept hearing was he's politically incorrect. And at first my reaction to that was, well, yeah, he's politically incorrect, but he's just a rude jerk. But I'm beginning to think that you kind of have to be a rude jerk in order to overcome political correctness. And what does political correctness do? Well, one of the functions it has is it makes us constantly conscious of difference and constantly worried about offending somebody who is different. And so what it does is it puts up barriers between people. And Trump comes in and, you know, he's completely unconscious of this. Of these
And of many other things.
of these niceties of racial and sexual and other forms of polytest that have built up, and if he can smash that, I think maybe we'll have more open communications. Eric Holder said a couple of years ago that we're a nation of cowards when it comes to race. And maybe Trump can help.
And I
relieve that.
I would agree to a certain extent. If you think about where discussion, particularly on college campuses, but it's spilled over, I think, into a regular conversation as well. We're talking about things such as safe spaces and microaggressions and things like that. I mean, it wasn't too long ago where what was considered racist was pretty cut and dried. Yeah. You knew what words not to use, but now it's like, oh well, that's a microaggression. That's cultural appropriation. You know, and so I do agree that when Trump gives you more or less kind of the real thing when it comes to bigotry, it should make these other things look a lot more.
And you know, a lot of liberals say, oh, look how hypocritical. You have the Paul Ryans of the world now saying Trump is, you know, giving the textbook definition of racist statements. But when you look at the long history of GOP positions, many of them amount to racist dog whistles, from opposing diversity programs on campus, which is before the Supreme Court right now, throwing out the Voting Rights Act, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which amount to a structured attack on black people in the United States.
Well, it's funny how the only people who can hear these dog whistles are people on the left. You know, the way a dog whistle works is a very high frequency that is inaudible to the human ear. If you can hear it, you're a dog.
That's funny, but on the question, why all of a sudden do they condemn Donald Trump for being a racist when they probably don't disagree with him on a lot of the Republican positions, and he not with them?
Well, I mean, it depends on which issue you want to look at. If you want to look at affirmative action, I mean, if you believe that people should be judged by their own skill set and by their own attributes, rather than just their race, you have a problem. You have a problem with affirmative action. I mean, that's why Sandra Day O'Connor, in one of the affirmative action cases a few years ago, said, you know, from her perspective as a moderate justice, affirmative action had a time where it was appropriate as a remedy to pass discrimination. But given the decades that have gone by, it needs to be phased out, and that's a perfectly legitimate argument.
Although people would say, would you say that racism has gone structurally from American society in a way that makes things like that no longer necessary?
I would say that the structural racism is a lot less than it was, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And if you look at the diverse society in which we're in right now, it's not just the idea of black people trying to get by in a white world. It's putting blacks against Asians, blacks against Hispanics, and so forth.
We're going to run out of time in a minute. Trump is, in many ways, a challenge to fundamental Wall Street Journal editorial board positions on the movement of labor and capital freely across borders, which he, wants less of both, it sounds like. Tax cuts on the wealthy as benefiting the entire economy. He seems more skeptical of that. Cutting future Social Security benefits as necessary to avoid a debt crisis. He seems skeptical of that. An aggressive U.S. military policy as the way to keep the world in general safe. And Americans, he seems skeptical of that. How do you feel as a Wall Street Journal editorial board member How fundamentally do you feel Donald Trump is challenging the Journal's worldview?
Well, fairly fundamentally on immigration and trade. I think some of those other issues are not necessarily things that he feels that strongly about. We were generally pretty happy with the tax plan he put out. Whether that actually turns into legislation, I don't know. On the other hand, if you look at, we like Paul Ryan's agenda. If you look at which potential president is likelier to sign bills that Paul Ryan puts through, I think you'll have a better success with Trump than with Mrs. Clinton.
And we leave it there for today. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. Orlando falls into many tragic categories. It's a mass shooting, it's a terrorist attack, and it's a hate crime. Now, despite political gains, a gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender person is still more likely than any other minority to be victim of a hate crime. This according to an analysis by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And a separate study finds an important correlation between LGBT-related legislation and the incidence of hate crimes. Laws matter. The author of that study joins us via Skype from North Carolina. He is Brian Levy, a doctoral candidate at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. His paper in the journal Social Science Research is called When Love Meets Hate, the relationship between state policies on gay and lesbian rights and hate crime incidents. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
What kinds of laws or policies did you look at specifically?
So we looked at three types of policies. The first was partnership recognition policy, so whether or not a state has a constitutional ban on same-sex marriage or grant same-sex marriages. We also looked at hate crime laws and employment non-discrimination laws, and whether or not those included sexual orientation as a protected class.
So let's put up one of your graphs as an example, and I think this is going to make it pretty clear to the viewers what you found. We modified this slightly for clarity, and here you see hate crimes were going down, but after state bans on same-sex marriage are passed, the crimes shoot back up. How would you describe what happened, and did it happen similarly in many states?
Same-sex marriage bans really centered around two elections, so the 2004 presidential election and the 2006 midterm election, and they were put on the ballot to increase voter turnout. Now what you see is that hate crimes had generally been dropping since 2000, but once we see the increase in the number of constitutional bans adopted, hate crimes began to rise again.
And was that nationwide or more in the states where these, or more limited to the states where these bans actually passed?
That tends to be state specific. So we looked at states individually and saw that in states where constitutional bans were passed, hate crimes went up. Conversely, in states where employment non-discrimination laws or hate crimes laws were passed, hate crimes tended to drop afterwards.
How do you explain the correlation?
So we do our best to control for any other potential confounders that might explain away this relationship. And what we're left with is a potential causal relationship that needs to be verified by future research. And what we think is going on is these laws either legitimize or delegitimize social stigma against LGBTQ individuals, and that this social stigma, social context, is really an important factor that drives either the production or the limitation of hate crimes.
The Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage nationwide was a year ago this month. Is it too early to measure whether hate crime incidents around the country have gone down as a result of that?
Unfortunately, it is too early. The hate crimes data tend to be lagged about a year and a half from when they're actually measured to when they're publicly reported. So the latest data that are available only run through 2014. But hopefully in a couple years, we'll be able to get better data on that.
I know one incident, as horrific as it is, does not really prove anything, but was anything going on in Florida in terms of policy recently that might have had a spillover effect on Orlando?
There haven't been any dramatic changes in Florida recently. There have been an uptick in the so-called bathroom bills across the South. So in North Carolina and Mississippi specifically, those two states have been debating and or adopting bathroom bills recently. And it is, you're right, tough to draw a potential causal relationship from one specific policy. So what we do is we look at all the policies enacted in 49 states in the District of Columbia from 2000 to 2012. And what we find is that, on general, the aggregate trend is that the more pro-equality policies you have, two good things happen. One, hate crimes go down. And then second, when hate crimes still occur, the likelihood that an individual reports the hate crime seems to go up due to the supportive policy environment, probably.
I might have expected a backlash effect where if policy is running ahead of public opinion, especially in certain more fringy anti-gay groups, if there's a law that seems to take the pro-gay side, that there might be an increase for a temporary period of time in hate crime incidents as part of a backlash. Did you find that anywhere, or did you look for it?
We also thought we might see that, and we didn't necessarily find that in our results. But you know, these are aggregate statistics, so there could be some backlash that's going on, but the effect is muted by the benefits and reductions of hate crimes, and so we can only see the total number of hate crimes. What I would say is that when the debates around the constitutional bans on same-sex marriage were happening in 2004 and 2006, there is some other research that points to an increase in stress and perceived threat of violence amongst the LGBT community surrounding those debates.
Well, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your research.
Thank you for having me.
And that's our program for today. We're here each week at this hour calling the presidential horse race and pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated campaign rhetoric. We had to postpone that segment we had promised about the presidential war on cancer. We'll get to that soon. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.
Looking at the economic benefits of all health research, and for heart disease, because mortality rate has come down quite a bit in heart disease, it's something like $30 trillion of money put into the economy. For cancer, for every 20% reduction in mortality, you have about a $10 trillion surge of resources into the economy, because there's been about a 25% reduction in cancer mortality since 1990.